All right, I'm going to call us to order. Good morning. I'm Dan Tupper, President of the Board and Commissioner for District 3. This is a special meeting of the PUD Board of Commissioners. It is Tuesday, August 11th, 2020, 10 a.m. Per Proclamation 2028, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Jefferson County PUD is not providing an in-person room for meetings of the BOC. All meetings will be accessible remote via WebEx until any further update of the governor's order. To join the meeting online, everyone is already on, knows where to go for that. If you're calling in by phone, use *6 to mute and unmute at the proper times. With that, I will call for introduction of commissioners to confirm we have a quorum.
Lieutenant Collins, Commissioner District 2.
Jeff Randall, Commissioner District 1.
So we have a full board. Welcome, everyone. With that, item number 2 is the agenda review. Is there anything to be added or any corrections to this from staff, commissioners? Seeing
No.
I do have a question about how we want to proceed with this, Kevin. I noticed there's no public comment per se on here. I don't know if we have any public on board. It doesn't look like it at the moment. How do you want to work any public comment?
So what we're hoping to do is get through certain portions of this, and then if public needs to jump in, they can. For example, would like to go through the talking points first. And then if public wants to question something there, we would. So at the end of each small section, again, this is very preliminary, and we'll take some comment, kind of as we finish up the section.
Okay, so with that, I would call for a motion to accept the agenda as submitted.
So moved.
I will second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
So the agenda is approved. With that, item number 3, presentation. So Kevin, I'll let you and staff take it away.
Okay, this is a preliminary discussion for the 2021 budget. What we're hoping to do is take feedback from the BOC and put a budget together for the 25th meeting. On the 25th meeting, we'll massage these numbers based on input we get on this meeting as how to move forward with the budget. I will tell you this, this budget contains almost everyone's wish list. We have moved some dollars around. We've left some in there. So as you see at the end, our cash reserves are down. That said, this is a starting point. This is where we're bringing it to the board saying, okay, we can live with this. How do you want to proceed moving forward? With that, Mike, do you want to, and how we'll do the meeting, Mike and I will work together. That's why we're here at the port together. So it's kind of a tag team. And as Mike says things or I say things, the other will add to the discussion. So if everyone's ready, we'll just jump right in.
So Kevin, I do have a real quick question. Maybe 2 primers to this. Did you guys work this up with the assumption that we would be refinancing the RUS loan? And do you have any resolution on the DOD grant? Are those 2 things figured into this?
No, and no.
Okay, thank you.
We will talk a little bit about those items as we talk about the capital budget and other work being performed, though, Dan. They are talking points.
All right, thank you.
So as we get started here, we did share this budget with FCS this morning. Kevin did in a meeting with them as they were just finalizing some stuff. And we are pretty well in line with what they're showing. There's a few little numbers, off here and there, but nothing too far reached. So they've reviewed it. They feel comfortable with where we're at. and with their numbers compared to their numbers. So getting into it, we'll just start going over some of the talking points. The revenues, we increased by 0.07% based on growth predictions. We don't think with this year going into next year that we're going to see a whole lot of growth. So we kept revenues at a pretty neutral, a little bit of growth, just we'll see a little bit. The expenses, another big one.
Before we go on there, the 0.7% growth also matches BPA. So we have a comfort level there that we're not. If anything, we may be understating it a little bit, but because we're so weather driven, we're comfortable with that number.
So most of our expenses we increased by 1.25%, kind of based on the consumer price index, kind of like what we did for the 2020 budget. We think there again, with everything that's happening, we're not going to see a big increase in inflation, so we're keeping everything kind of at a pretty low level. Fleet, we did increase just a little bit, just because possibly new vehicles, new personnel that could be coming. We did budget for 2 new positions. That was one that we've already cut. Everybody's wish list was, I think, like 7 or 8 positions that they would have liked to see. Kevin and I reviewed it and we cut it down just to 2 for right now.
Can you tell us which positions?
Right now, we just put 2 placeholders in there. Well, one of them is an electrical superintendent, which that's one that we're doing now, but we have to budget for it because we don't have it now. And then one other position, which is just a placeholder at this time.
It would be probably equivalent to an admin assistant for one of the departments. At least wage-wise, that would be the position.
One other question to move on the fleet expense. Is that completely all new additions, or are we also looking at some surplusing or trade-in? I mean, what exactly does that 2%? Is that all new additions?
No, that's just the overall expenses. That's the fuel costs, the maintenance of the vehicles. That doesn't have to do with any of the buying new vehicles yet or not.
Oh, okay, thanks.
We'll get to that in the capital budget portion of it.
And it is based on historical numbers. The historical numbers went up 2%.
Some other big highlights, we're keeping our BPA costs relatively the same based on their projections. We did add a little bit for increase for the cost adjustment for BPA. We are starting to bill ourselves on the water side for electricity for pumping the water and stuff. So we did go with those in there. The electric transmission, this is one that is off with FCS, but it's the Bonneville Power transmission cost plus it's some of our own expenses. We do have $800,000 for tree trimming. This is our normal tree trimming recycling program, plus additional cost for outages, things, hotspots that pop up. We want to make sure that we have enough money in there to keep the lines clear. We do have $150,000 per RCW 54.16.100 for raises that Kevin can use as he sees fit under the administrative and general expenses. All of our interest, our debt payments, they're all based on the loan documents, the covenants that we have with RUS, USDA Rural Development bonds.
So, Dan, what we're budgeting for is what we're paying today. We're hoping that if the House bill moves forward to let us refinance our RUS debt, that's approximately $1 million out of interest we wouldn't have to pay that could be used for capital projects or could be used for anything.
Yeah, it's just $1 million savings that would help us out in other areas. And then all the historical costs, all the expenses for labor, benefits, fleet, inventory, they're all based on historical information. We use the actual expenses from January through May of this year, and then we averaged it out for the remainder of the year. That's just because we changed our departments at the beginning of the year. We didn't have a whole lot of historical data with the departments that we have going on now. Will you go to the next page? Training, because a lot of training didn't happen this year. We did increase training budgets for 2021. There again, we don't know whether trainings are going to happen, when they might happen, but we got a few that, as for a growth, they need to take training. So we increased it a little bit to try to help get those caught back up.
And I will clarify training a little bit too. For example, training might not mean that they actually go to a class. It may be they attend a WAPUTA conference. So we're using training to cover the cost of in 2021, for example, we may send somebody to a WAPUTA meeting, and that meeting is covered under the training budget.
Yeah, training is a broad term in the budget. It's conferences, it's online learning, it's travel to the trainings. So it's not just a training thing. We do have COLAs in there. We have a 4% COLA for the non-reps. And then the COLAs for the union employees are based on their contracts. Property tax revenue.
Well, hold on one thing. We do negotiate the new laborers contract. So we're not exactly sure how the laborers contract is going to come out. I sent an email to Melanie. She responded back. She's working with the business rep with the laborers and trying to set up a meeting, but we don't have our first meeting date set yet. It's in the process. So there may be some fine tuning as we go through the laborers contract for 2021 and 2 and 3.
But they will be we're basing it on what projections that we think may happen for the laborers, the union, the IBW one, we have theirs because it just got ratified early, a couple months ago. So we had that one. The property tax revenues, we're keeping about the same. And the plan right now is for 100% of the funds to go to broadband to help fund projects for that. Getting into the capital projects here. Of course, we have the 4-year work plan for the electrical that was already approved by the board. We did make some few changes to it, which we'll get to here in a little bit. The water construction projects, they're based on needs and also are part of the 10-year work plan that is being worked on with HDR.
Now, on the water capital for 2021, we took out one project from the work plan, and that was a $2 million construction project for the Quilcene water tank. Now, we're not saying that project is canceled. We're saying we're going to go after grants, loans, and other funding sources, so it wouldn't come out of our budget because we can't take a $2 million hit on the water side. So some of the budget items that have either been reduced or eliminated short term, we're hoping to get funding so it doesn't actually hit our budget. So that's as we move forward, we will point out a couple projects such as the Quilcene water tank that we are going to try to do, but it'll be through a different funding source.
And then part of the capital projects, we do have a little bit of the building remodel because it's going to go into 2021. So we have to we're including a little bit of that. That one, that's a moving target because we don't know when it's going to finish up or how far into 2021 we're going to go. We got some other warehouse improvements we'd like to see, some new IT equipment, or some fleet, broadband projects, some tools, and then communications and some other engineering costs. Again, the principal payments that we've included, they're based on our loan documents. As we get back in, you'll see that down towards the bottom with our cash flow, we did add depreciation back in. It's a non-cash expense. It gets taken out as an expense, but it doesn't affect cash, so we add it back in. On the water side, we still do have some LUDs that are making assessment payments through the treasurer's office, so that's a little extra money there. And then, of course, we have the trenching costs that we have to include as revenue, but they're not. It's a non-cash, so it doesn't really affect the cash. So we take that back out too. So those are kind of the highlights of the talking points of how we got started and where we're going with this 2021 budget. Are there any questions up to this point from the commissioners? Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking no. So will we go to the? Oh wait, kid's got one.
Yeah, when can we anticipate that the 10-year water construction plans will be submitted?
I'll jump in here, Ken. Several of the meetings we're going to have in the next month have to do specifically with the water plan. So we're hoping within 2 to 3 months they will be completed. You'll get a list of the 10-year items prior to that, but they won't be in the approved format yet. That list was shared with FCS, or the preliminary list was shared with FCS, and it is used for their forecasting purposes. And I will take a minute to discuss this. When we talked to FCS this morning, our water budget, we had removed the $2 million water tank. They did not. They left it in there because on their budget, if we borrow the money, there's long-term debt associated with it that has to be paid over length of time, stuff like that. So when you do a comparison between what Mike has put together here and what they put together, they're kind of different to a point. They have the same basic information, but they're two different purposes. So I am going to point out that's some of the differences between what we have done and what they've done. We're very close in numbers, and once you look at everything as a whole, we're just right there. So, and they were done independently. So I'm hoping that gives some board an added comfort level, at least with the numbers so far to date.
So Kevin, on FCS, do you have a little better idea of timing with the rate study and cost of service, how it's going to mesh up with our budget talks?
Part of the meeting this morning was a last little bit of exchange of information. We believe within the next couple of days, we will be able to guarantee they'll be at the board meeting on the 18th, and that will be required revenues. So if we make that deadline, within a month, they'll be able to produce some additional numbers to you once they get some guidelines on how you want to do different projects. So they're going to be close. We aren't planning a rate increase in this budget. But if it happens, then we would massage the numbers a different way and it would help cash flow. So, if you look at, once we get to the end, you're going to see our cash flow is pretty weak at the end of the year. Right now, this budget does not take into consideration a increase in electric or water. Now, we're very comfortable water has to take an increase, but until the meeting on the 18th, we won't add any of that in. I hope that answered your question, Dan.
Who's next?
Oh, we're gonna just go on now with, this is the actual budgets. Can you guys see that okay on the screens? So this is what the actual, just a summary of what the budgets are gonna look like. We'll start with the electrical utility. So we're saying, operating revenues are gonna be right around about $37.5 million. Total operating costs, we're looking at $38.5 million. And that's part, everything's listed there. It's the BPA costs, it's labor, benefits, material, everything that goes into making the utility run, plus the interest expenses, the tax expenses. So operating margins, we're going to lose about $1 million. But our non-operating margins, which includes our aid to construction, the trenching costs, tax revenues, interest income, we're making about $2.1 million. So that gives us, Will, can you scroll down just a little bit, bring the bottom portion in? Yep, you're good. Yeah, go ahead. Right there, that should be good. So our net margins, we're looking at making $1.1 million for the electric utility. As you can see down below, we have the cash flow there. Our construction projects, we're looking at about $3.3 million going out. General plant purchases, which includes part of the building remodel, we're looking at just under $4 million. And then we have just under $3.5 million for principal for our RUS loan. When you add everything back in, we have an outflow of cash of $4.7 million. So we're having to use about $3.5 million out of our reserves, our cash reserves, to make up the difference. With this information, our tier would be at 1.43, and our debt service coverage would be at 1.52. So that's a brief summary, brief highlight of the electrical utility budgets. Now, if we can scroll back up to the top, Will, we'll go over a brief overview of the water budget. And again, for your reference, the talking points are to the right there. So as you're going back and reviewing, you can see which talking points we hit. But we're budgeting our water revenues about 2.7 million. We got some power production, our total operating expenses, including the power to produce the water, labor, benefits, everything, material and everything, about $3.9 million. So operating margins are a loss of about $1.2 million. Again, they have non-operating margins, which includes some of the LUD payments, some tax revenues, some aid to construction. They're for about $1 million. So their net loss is about $250,000.
Mike, can I ask a question at this point?
Yes.
Going back to the electrical side, we just added $5 million to the electrical reserves. And if we take for 2021, 3.6 million out of those reserves, where does that leave us in terms of unrestricted reserves for electrical?
Well, actually, I have a cash summary here. Just a little bit, Ken.
Let's just go to it now.
Okay, Will, can you go to the cash summary?
I can wait.
Yeah. Oh no, we're good. Just got to get Will. Will's controlling the the screens for us. So So this is using based off of June's numbers. So you can see that if 2020 ended at the end of June, which we know it just because it's hard to predict where everything's going to be at, we were at about $12.4 million in unrestricted cash.
And I will say this, that in the 2020 budget, that was our target goal at the end of the year to have 12.4 million, 12.5 million.
So if we take out the 4.7, just out of that, not using the $5 million line of credit, that leaves us with about $7.7 million in unrestricted cash. So if you add with the 5 million, we would still be right about the $12.7 million.
Now, and we're kind of going a little out of order, but I'm going to throw this as part of the discussion. We're estimating, our reserves to come down this year because of our building. The building didn't get built quite on the time frame, so we know some of the reserves are going to be spent in 2021. So I will say this: my glass is half full. We have several months where we can continue to work on the 2020 budget to build reserves up so that in 2021 we start at a higher number. Now, whether it can be done, I don't know, but we are taking some steps trying to build reserves moving forward, just to give us a bigger cushion to start in 2021.
Yeah, so I mean, because these are Junes, as we get closer to October, when a final budget, is presented and being reviewed for approval, we'll have a better idea of what the cash is going to look like towards the end of the year. Did that answer your question, Ken? Okay. So we'll go back up to the page up, Will, so we can go over the water budget. So going back through the water budget here, we were their net margin, they were going to have a net loss for 2021 of about $250,000. Going through the cash flow budget, we have about $1.1 million in construction projects scheduled. Like Kevin said, we took out a couple of projects, one big project, a $2 million Closine water tank project, that if we get funding for it, we'll do it. If we don't get funding, we won't do it in 2021. We'll look at 2022 or in the next couple of years, depending on when funding is available. We do have a couple of fleet vehicles that we need to purchase for the water side. That's where the $110,000 is coming from. They have about $550,000 in principal that has to be paid. And then we do have, of course, some money coming in from the LUDs. So their outflows is about $928,000, which leaves an outflow of about $1.1 million, even with the money. So that's where about $4.7 million in reserves that we're spending is coming from on the cash summary page.
And I'm going to jump in here. So to me, and this is where Mike and I start reviewing our numbers to either reduce or increase things. So general plant purchases affect cash flow tremendously. So as you can see, we have 3.9,
About $4 million.
almost $4 million in general plant. And that's a place where we could reduce some costs. So as we go through this, we will point out some places where maybe we could increase revenue, or maybe where we could decrease our cost. But general plant, that's a pretty big number for us and could be reduced to help offset the need to withdraw from our cash reserves.
And also talking with FCS today, there's a couple of spots in some of the expenses, like our tax expense and stuff, that we're going to review the numbers and make sure, just offer some suggestions that they offered on things that we may be too conservative on them. We'll review them and take a look, but that's kind of where we're at right now on the expense budgets and the cash flow. But we'll go ahead and get ready to go through some of the capital projects, unless there's any questions on any of these.
Will, can you go to the capital projects?
So the first one is our electrical 4-year work plan, capital costs. Kevin and I have already reviewed some of this. We were about 5 million to start with, I think. And we've got it down to about $3.3 million now. These are all the projects that we're looking at to complete in 2021. There are a few of them that we've discussed that we may hold off until later in the year. And depending on how our cash is at, we'll either move forward with them or we'll move them to 2022.
We do have some, even on the electrical side, some grant opportunities, some ways to supplement this income or these outflows. So we do, we get contribution and aid. So as different things happen, you know, if we have a busy year, we'll get more contribution and aid. If it's a slow year, we'll get less. That's all figured up above. For 2021, this is probably a more realistic goal for our crews to complete. We won't have contractors in here as much. We can do some additional money cuts in this area. This is one that would work closely with the board. The board can go through and if you have questions, we'll answer them. Or really, there's ways to say, okay, does it make sense to do it this year? In my past, some of these projects we would postpone till the very end of the year. And if our cash reserves are better than what we thought, then we would go ahead with some of these capital projects. But we're extremely comfortable with these numbers, but they can be dropped a little bit with work between the commissioners and staff to either move monies around or to lower certain things. So a lot of room there yet to work on.
So Kevin, I know in 2020, we took some money out for broadband, the 330, whatever thousand it was. And Hastings was one of the projects. I noticed there's quite a few line items here for Hastings. Did that get put back into this 21 budget, the project that we took out?
So Hastings was a multi-year project. So this budget reflected what we were going to do after the completion of the work this year. In a nutshell, what we did is the work we were going to do this year is reflected in this budget, and these numbers would have to go into the next year's budget to complete that cycle. So in a roundabout way, yes.
And then the second was, I noticed there's about 190,000, if I added that up here, right, between SCADA and call outs here. Are those going to be part of the broadband budget that you're talking about for, I don't know, was it 600,000 later on, or are these separate items from that?
Those are separate items. We do kind of keep, we're trying to keep some funds in the capital work for additions to the fiber network that just support electric. That's rare, and it won't happen very often, but electric does have a play with fiber, and so that money is in electric for them to extend to a substation or do some of the network gear they need at each site. So we could easily move that money out, but it does reflect what we feel would be the electrical side of the issue.
Thanks.
And Kevin, the logic behind that is that fiber that's directly serving the electrical side is easily logically covered by electrical rates because it's part of the electrical system, correct?
Correct.
I noticed that there's $1.25 million, item 705-1 for meter replacement. And what do you see as the process here? My understanding was that we were going to study the cost benefit of large-scale meter replacement before moving ahead.
So in one of the next upcoming meetings this year, we will dedicate it to, lack of a better term, AMI, a path forward with metering. And at that time, staff and the board will work together to come up with a path. We know we're going to have to start replacing meters and move it in a different direction than we are today. And that's just based on age of equipment, contractually, those kind of things. So we left that in there. We don't think it would be spent at the first of the year, but by the end of the year, we would have to have a plan forward. And that may be one thing that those could be reduced a little bit. We did take $250,000 out of that in the original board approved 4-year work plan. It was 1.5. That was an easy place to take 250,000 out because of timing and when the money would actually be spent. So that one's going to be a work in progress.
Since you talked about contracts there, Kevin, where are we at with Landis and Gear? What's the timelines, and are we hearing from them at all?
We hear from them quite a bit. We get a lot of, they would like to see us move forward with an AMI project. They know what they're doing now. It's really hard to sustain the equipment and to keep going what we have going. So we have, I'm going to say, 2 years left on the contract. They have verbally said that they will continue on till the end of that contract. They do have some proposals that will be brought up to the board, and as we start to talk about AMI and things they want to see.
Thanks, Kevin. You were breaking up a little bit. Am I the only one that experienced that? He was breaking up a little bit.
Oh, he sounds clear to me.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the next one, the water capital projects, Will. So here are the water capital projects that we've got included in the $1.1 million budget. Like we did say, we have taken out the $2 million. We're going to go out and see what we can find for funding on it. But these are all things that are based on recommended plan, the 10-year plan plus what is needed. There could be additional funding for some of these projects. They're all ones that we need to do.
I will talk a little bit in generalities here. Some of these projects are projects that's been on our drawing board for many years, and we have not tackled them yet. Sooner or later, we're going to have to start completing some of our capital work for water and sewer. To that end, that's why this budget is so high. It's primarily trying to take into account work that needs to be done. I do believe, along with the electric capital work, that these projects could be reviewed and, maybe trimmed down, maybe done some things. But on the water side, it's a little bit harder because these projects have been on the board for so long. Any questions?
So on the Bywater Bay, Kevin, could you explain that a little bit to us, that LUD for Bywater Bay Shine Plat?
Are you talking?
The 402,000.
Oh, we've been requested, and this happened, I think, and I may even have Sam jump in here. 3-4 years ago, we were requested to do an LUD in Shine Flat, and we are just now finishing up working with the homeowners association. Sam and Bill had a meeting with them on Saturday. They've actually talked to the board at least one time in the past, maybe twice. This goes back, like I say, over 4 years, that we think will move it forward as long as we get the support from the homeowners association.
So my question is, will we recover any of that 402, or is that all just PUD cost?
We hope to recover part of that money, but some will be PUD costs, not the 402, but we do hope to recover some of it.
Any idea on what those kind of numbers would look like? Just a ballpark?
Sam's working closer with the engineers to come up with some numbers. In a couple weeks, maybe a month, we will have a better idea.
All right, thanks. And I did have one other question, and that's on the DOT Chimacum Creek project, the 190,000. Again, that's going to be like Kilsit Harbor. We're not going to recover any of that cost, correct? But yet only the water customers are going to pay for that?
We are going to try to get some funding for that project. We've had people have told us different things, that there would be some available monies for the PUD. I don't know if there will be. To be safe, you're going to have to figure you're going to spend it all out from PUD funds, but we hope to recoup some.
And Kevin, physically, which crossing of Chimacum Creek is that? Which highway crossing, or is it multiple highway crossings?
That's just the one off of 16. Is that right? By Chimacum Elementary.
Got it. Thank you. Between Chimacum Elementary and the Cenex, basically. Oh no, that's the one approaching the elementary near the library. That one.
By the library, yes.
That one almost kind of floods a little bit, so I can see that.
So I froze up and missed the last 60 seconds. Sorry. So I guess my question again was, do we have a split out? That's mostly going to be moving water line there, right? I know there'll be some power, but.
Do you mind if I jump in for scope? Right.
Yeah, keep it short though, because the scope's not as important to this discussion. It's just total dollars.
Yes, this is the estimate's only for water. That's short. Is that short?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fiber and power will be rerouted, but it will be part of a construction that was going to happen anyway. So it's much easier, at least for this project, to get the power and fiber rerouted.
So I guess my overarching question here, and it's going to be one moving forward as we get into 2022 when there's a lot more of these type of projects, how can we expect only 5,000 water customers to kind of eat this charge?
I don't know, Dan, but it is only to do with water. We could look at options, but with I'm going to call them bridge replacement, culvert replacement, we're going to have some dollars going out that are not driven by anything other than WASDOT.
And Kevin, I can't remember where this sits on the bigger scheme of the overall budget. We were talking about some financing. Was that financing really related more to the Quilcene tank replacement project, or is the financing possibly going to be used for any of these items?
I think specifically on the water, some of the financing needs to look at every one of these projects and see if it's if we can get a grant or a loan application. I don't believe the state will have much money available in 2021, but the federal government does. USDA has some funds available, and I think part of our overall strategy moving forward has to be to not only apply, but look at the loans, the grants, and all opportunities for funding sources.
So one other thing too, if we could get the list of the water systems and the number of customers on each, I'd like to have that for, looking at this budget as we move forward.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all I had on the water capital side.
Any other questions? No?
Next slide, Will. This is our broadband budget. For construction, we have $500,000. We put in 50,000 to come up with a couple LUDs and to help start them out with. We do know we need some equipment, switches, routers, items like that for 60,000. And then we have a line extension for 65,000 with a total of 675,000. Very rough. This would pay for itself based on the taxing authority going to broadband and the $100 and some thousand being paid for fiber connection. Real rough numbers were 600,000. So that's roughly what this budget is based on, is known money coming in at approximately that 600 plus range.
So is that like off of what we charge for our wholesale, and is this part of what we get out of NOAANET then, as far as that cost recovery you're talking about?
Yeah, the 500 would be tax. 100 and some thousand is our split from the NOAANET revenue. And we need to kind of not refer to them as NOAANET revenues anymore. They're our revenues. They're money owed to the PUD, and they're just fiber revenue. And hopefully they will grow, but right now we're at a little over 600,000. As long as the board agrees to taking the tax dollars to the broadband capital costs.
Kevin, you don't have to go into this now, but I think it would be good to have a draft of the construction projects on which we would be spending the $500,000.
Okay. And some of that, I'll just throw this in real quick because it was part of the discussion this morning with Lori Ray and Colton. the broadband group. We have several projects. We do feel we're going to work real closely again with the school districts, which may move us at least short term in a little different direction where it's less fiber extension and more, I'm going to just say trying to help out the community. I don't know what that's going to look like, but there is some projects scheduled, but we've also have some reserved in for the unknowns and trying to help with remote learning, stuff like that.
So that was going to be my question, is how much of this budget is known how you want to spend it, and how much of this budget is, here's a reasonable amount that we feel like we can budget for broadband. Some of it is to be determined. We want to make positive steps and progress on broadband as for this county, and this is a first step, and we don't know how we're going to spend all of it. But can you just verify that a little bit?
You're correct, Jeff. A lot of this is spent money, but a lot of it is we don't know. And we do need to start, for example, we're going to build out of Chimicum substation through a whole new path to get to Indian Island and to Port Ludlow. That also includes fiber conduit, fiber vaults, fiber eventually in the conduit. So those are projects that are ongoing that broadband will have to start paying for, and that's part of the cost that we know of. We're going to, for the fish project, we're going to build some projects to make sure that we can bypass some of these bridges with loops. So I'm going to say maybe 3/4 of the money has been tentatively allocated, and then 1/4 depending on how everything else goes. Very rough number.
And it feels like another part of what we're doing here is we've just kind of had broadband lumped into electrical historically, and things have been happening, money's been spent, but it's just kind of been part of the electrical budget. And it seems like what we're trying to do now is saying, we eventually want broadband to stand on its own. Let's start bringing it out into the light, separate a little bit the broadband for electrical versus the broadband for, say, community, we could call it. And it seems like that's kind of what you're doing. We're bringing it out. It's starting to stand on its own. It's at this point would be heavily dependent on property tax revenue to build this infrastructure that then a business can be run on. But is that also correct?
Very correct. This is the first steps in kind of having it a standalone, I'm not going to call it division, but standalone portion of the company or the PUD.
Well, it's standalone line of business, and it's very much in line with what we're doing with water too, trying to disconnect it from other entanglements in the PUD and have these things be a little more clear on what the line of business is.
Yes.
Thank you.
So 2 quick questions, Kevin. One is the work that we're going to be doing on the Bonneville with Mason County and that, is this part of this numbers that we're looking at, or is that separate?
Part of that is in these numbers, but it would be the part that's completed in 2021. It would, for example, some of the equipment would be in the BPA project. We didn't fund the whole project in 2020 because we don't think we could get that far into it. So a little bit of this is part of the BPA project.
Okay, and then the second question is the LUD, is that something that's in the works, or is that something we anticipate, the 50,000 for the LUD?
There is some planning going on. Lori Ray has looked at some places where LUDs make sense. We have engaged a little bit with NOAANET on equipment and things that would make an LUD more viable. So I'm going to say we're in the early stages, but we believe the LUD system for broadband is going to be part of the future moving forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Next slide, Will. So this is our facilities improvements capital projects for 2021. Not knowing where the upgrade's going to be for 310, we left $1.5 million in there. That could change. It could be less, hopefully not anymore. We need to replace the line crew double wide trailer. And then now that we have a mechanic fleet person on board, we kind of need to start getting him a spot set up where he can start working. So we're going to remodel one of the open sheds to allow him to start working. So the facilities upgrade, that's a moving target there. The double wide trailer that is there now, it was bought used. It's, well past its useful life. It's fallen apart. We need to get something that's a little bit more safe for them to be in. And then, of course, we do need somewhere where we can start working on some of our own trucks, save us some money, send them out all the time to be worked on. So we're looking about $2 million in facility improvements there. Again, some of this can be pushed off, held up a little bit, depending on where the cash, the facilities upgrade can't, but the other two items, we can kind of hold off until later in the year, depending on where everything's at.
And this is a wish list. Approximately 10 people worked on this budget, a little over, well, almost 15 by the time you go down and down and down.
Yeah.
Some of these, there may be other solutions that could be implemented. And so what we're showing you is really the wish list. And then there are other ways to accomplish the same goals. And we'll talk about that in upcoming meeting. Next slide, Will.
So this is just some of our warehouse and yard improvements. Just trying to make the warehouse, the electrical at 310 for the electrical side, just a little bit more user friendly, more storage. We're going to extend the fence a little bit, give us a little bit more room to work, maneuver trucks around as we go through. There again, this is just kind of a wish list thing. We're looking about $436,000 for warehouse and yard improvements. That can kind of change as the year goes through, and should we need to knock some money down, we can cut down some of the projects and stuff.
Again, this is one place where the 375 eventually needs to be done, but doesn't have to be in 2021. That becomes part of the discussion.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment. This page and the last page, I think we need to seriously think about with COVID, what's been going on, what we've witnessed, what supply chains look like and what timelines look like and what kind of overruns those run to. So I think we need to be really careful with these last two, even though it's been said they were wish list items, to really nail down what we do need, in the immediate future and not get too carried away because of the reasons I just stated.
And I'm going to throw this out there just for everyone. The one thing that COVID has shown us is we do need more area, because in the past we've kind of always kept people in a smaller confinement area, or their workspaces were smaller. This is part of the juggling act with the COVID, is you need more office space. You can't put 15 people in a very small open area and expect it to work in 2021. So looking forward to discussions on this. There are some solutions, some easy ways to reduce these costs, but we are starting here.
Yeah. So yeah, they are things that we can, as we get farther along, we can discuss and go through. Any other questions on? Okay, next slide, Will. So this is for information technologies. First is, we might need some new switches for the new building, make sure everybody's up and running properly on the network in there. And then Melanie would like to look at getting some type of HR recruitment software, something make things a little bit easier on the HR side of things. And those are rough. The 25,000 is probably a pretty secure number. The 30,000, that's probably a rough number. There again, these are wish list items, not that much, but if it's something that needs to be cut, we could cut it.
Again, I'm just going to throw this out there with the COVID. As you work from home, some of our network costs go up a little bit. They are expensed because they're less than the $5 threshold, but or $5,000 threshold. But there are, with what's everything that's happening, there are kind of additional expenses that we as a PUD are going to have to bear, at least for the next couple years.
So Kevin, on this one, you're not going to hear me say this very often, but I'm going to say, are we really maybe not spending enough money here? How does this figure in with the Jeffcom connection? If we follow through with doing some stuff with Jeffcom, would this be a place that some of our money may go towards that type of a project? And cybersecurity too, as things get crazier in the world, is this another place that cybersecurity should be looking for money coming into this for that purpose?
A lot of what you're talking about, Dan, the individual items are below $5,000, so they get expensed out. They don't show up on the capital. This is items and software over $5,000. So that's why these numbers look kind of small, but anymore you can buy a computer for $1,500, a nice laptop. So you're not seeing those in this slide. Those were back in the expensed items.
So Kevin, the IT budget is more than this, basically.
Much more than this. Much more smaller items.
Okay, Will, next slide. So this is looking at the wish list of electrical fleet capital cost for 2021. Looking at getting a new small bucket truck for 165,000. Scott requested a vehicle for his departments, which for 40,000. Some shop equipment there again to help get our mechanic up and running, get tools to work on the trucks, about 85,000.
This was one place we've already reduced it a little bit. We did drop this number down, thinking, okay, a slow process of purchasing the equipment for working on trucks, spread it over a couple of years.
Yeah, and we did take out a couple of vehicles. This was had been up around $800,000. We've cut it quite a bit. We have a vehicle for broadband for 55,000. We need to replace one of the electrical meter readers trucks for 55,000, and then an underground cable puller trailer for 120,000. So we're roughly looking about $500,000 in electrical fleet. There again, we can hold off on some of this stuff until later in the year, see how cash reserves go, and go from there. Or if there's any discussion, we can take that into account also.
This seems like it's an area that we've been every year we mess around with and kind of push things off. What's kind of been our recent history on vehicle investments? There's always been bucket trucks that appear on the last few budgets. Have we? What is
usually end up getting cut? I mean, the bucket trucks we usually end up getting cut just because they are a big expense. They do take a little bit of time to get done. That's one we are going to have to eventually start looking. I mean, we've got vehicles that are 8 years old, 9 years old. You know, they're starting to get up there with their useful life. So we are going to have to start replacing vehicles, especially the bucket trucks here pretty soon. Right now, you know, we're doing a lot of leasing, which adds, you know, cost on the expense side of things.
Right. So because this is a discretionary one and we've messed around with it a lot, I'm just thinking on this line item, it might possibly be helpful to have a little bit more detail of perhaps the age of the fleet or perhaps how many vehicles we're renting and what the needs are so that we don't just keep kicking this one down the road.
Yeah, we can definitely get that provided to you guys.
I would say on the rentals, at least on the buckets, a lot of times we end up purchasing when it makes sense, so that we rent it for a while and then we move forward with the purchase.
And some
So
of them will go towards the purchase price.
So Kevin, on the underground cable puller, is that a new item for us, or are we from having subcontractors do that service and using their equipment, or is this a replacement or new?
New to the PUD.
So will it help us to save on subcontractor costs by having that piece of equipment?
Very minimal. I don't, I wish I could say, yes, it'll pay for itself in 1 year. No, it's something we need, but we will continue to have contractors come in and do some of that type of work.
So kind of to Jeff's point about getting a little more information on fleet, I have posed kind of a question here to you guys that maybe, you know, looking at the water fleet and the electrical fleet together, maybe in the short term here on this budget to save some money if we, you know, really look like we need to definitely find places to save. Is there a way that we can surplus or sell, you know, vehicles that may be get close to being out of service from the electrical to the water and gain some ground, you know, some time there?
In the past, it usually went the other way, Dan, that the water would surplus the equipment over to the electrical department. That's how we've got a couple of the trucks. So, yes, you can do that.
All right, but just was curious if that was a way to maybe cut a little bit of fleet cost if we really felt that that was a place we wanted to go to look.
Yeah, but we're almost bare minimum on some of our vehicles. So there's not a whole lot of room to do that between the two utilities because they do require different vehicles on some stuff.
That was kind of my point because it feels like the past 3 years we keep doing this. So it's like you can get things to keep going for a while, but eventually it ends up costing you more and paying to repair old stuff than just getting rid of it.
We're close to being there.
Along the same lines, we'll go ahead and go to the next page because that's the water fleet one. I only have a couple of things in there. Our meter reader trucks need to be replaced, and also the sewer truck, which they're both just Chevy Colorados, but they're 9 years old, I think. Can't remember the age, years, but they're 9 years old. They got over 100 and some thousand miles on them. You know, to Jeff's point, at some point in time, they cost more to keep repairing than going to get a new one. And vehicles are something that you can actually hold off through the year. You know, yes, we go through the state contracts. Some of those don't hit until later in the year. So we can kind of look at the cash reserves, see where we're at on some things before we make that purchase.
Well, it's nice to know too that it's not like we're driving around in gold-plated rigs that we're replacing every 3 or 4 years. If we're running stuff 8 to 10 years, a lot of the times that's really pretty frugal.
There was a dump truck on this request that we did remove. We felt that at least in 2021, on the water side, we would take the dump truck out. and, maybe revisited in 2022.
Any other questions on the fleet?
Well, dump truck, is that something that would be utilized by, all the divisions of the, or is it just water that would utilize it?
I could see where electrical could use it. It wasn't requested by electric.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
So this is the electrical tools and some PPE equipment. These are for tools that are over $5,000. If it's under $5,000, it just goes through the expense budget. Same way with the PP&E, PPE. It's anything that's over $5,000. This is roughly what we use the same year to year. $75,000 in tools, $25,000 in the protection equipment. Now that we're doing the $5,000 threshold, a lot of the tools get expensed. There's a few tools that will get capitalized. So any questions on that one? Okay. Next slide, Will. So this is some contracted engineering costs that we can capitalize. We got some electrical engineering capital costs for 100,000. That's using other engineers, outside engineering firms to help with projects. We're going to start in 2021 trying to do a utility pole inspection for 75,000. That's going to allow us to get our poles tested, have an outside group come in and kind of see where our poles are at, and helping us with some replacements that could be coming up down the line. And then we have 30,000 for an emergency management plan and risk. This is kind of goes back to the risk management policy, the wildfires. How do we handle emergency management? Should a storm hit? Should a wildfire hit? What's the plan? Who do we call? Will's playing with things here. How do we handle all that stuff? What is our response? How do we respond? So for those costs, we have about $205,000 in capital costs.
So contract to do pole inspection, that is a requirement. You're supposed to test so many poles. We are way behind. We haven't done it. And then the emergency management plan, again, we have plans, but this would combine power, water, broadband, sewer, everything together in a single document. And it would be more company-wide. Again, they are requirements, not only on the electric side, but on the water side. So those two pretty important things that should have been done in the past, and we're putting them in for 2021.
Any questions on that one? All right, well, the last thing was kind of just, the review of the cash summary, which we kind of touched base on before. If we do every project that we listed here, we make the money we say we're going to make, expense everything we are going to expense. We're going to have to use about $4.7 million out of our reserves. So if 2020 ended at the end of June and 2021 ended today, we'd have about $7.7 million of unrestricted cash in the bank. And then we have about $3.5 million in restricted cash, which has to do with a lot of our LUD loan payments and the water funding that are required by covenants. So that, in a nutshell, is the preliminary 2021 budget. We do have a couple more things to go over. If you guys, unless you have some more questions on the 2021 budget.
I have one question, and that is, what amount do we need to have in our unrestricted reserve to cover us for 90 days?
I think we're a little shy. I think it's right around $9 million that we have to have for the 90-day reserves, between 9 and $10 million. So, but with the line of credit, we're at 12.5 or $12.7 million. So we would still technically have our 90-day cash reserve, because the line of credit does qualify as part of the reserves available for the 90 days. Granted, we don't want to, pull it down at one time, because then we have to just pay it back, but it's there if it's needed for the 90 days. All right, any other questions on the 2021 budget? Okay, Will, you want to go to the next slide? So as part of this preliminary process, Kevin and I talked about it. We wanted to give you kind of a starting point of where we're at. So what you're looking at here is the combined utilities. It's projecting what the 2020 year end is going to look like, and then where the 2021 budgets are. So it kind of shows you where some differences are, more or less. Revenues are about $140,000 higher in 2021. Our total operating and maintenance expenses, we're about $1.6 million higher with the 2021 budget than what we're projecting for the 2020 year end. Cost of service, total cost of service, we're looking about $2 million higher in the 2021 budget. We are losing about almost $2 million between the two budgets. So this is a combined, just kind of showing you what, comparing year-end 2020 projections to the 2021 budget projections, just to give you an idea of where we started from and how we make changes to the two. And the next two slides are just broken down by electric and water with the same information.
So, Mike, a question for you on, because of the proclamations and moratoriums, we're not collecting fees and penalty type of things. What kind of revenue so far have we lost due to though not collecting those? Do you have a round ballpark number?
I don't right offhand, Dan. I mean, it's minimal. Our late fees are, $5. We have some. That's really would be the only thing, and it's probably minimal. I don't have the exact numbers right offhand here.
Well, yeah, that didn't need a real big number, but listening to what you're saying, if this were projected out, if we went through all of 2021 under the same type of moratoriums and you still feel like it's a manageable number then if this continued out on that particular issue?
You're looking at, I think, we did, and part of the thing, and I forgot to mention it, for the 2021 budget, we did up our low income credit on the electric side to $500,000 from, where it was previously. I think we were, 250, we almost doubled it for 2021. So we do know, that's going to increase. So we did account for that portion of it. But as far as like late fees, $100,000 maybe pushing it. I mean,
and then projecting on that same type of a thing through the end of next year, if things didn't get better on those fronts, the arrears, what are we looking like there as far as revenue? Any ideas what at the end stayed on this same trajectory, what that would look like for revenue loss?
It's hard to say. We do account for we do have include an allowance for uncollectible debt in our budgets, and even on a monthly basis. So we do account for that. We probably have for that. I think I have about 60,000 or so, 65,000, just on the electric side. Water isn't as much, so we do account for it. It's just not in the revenues. It's down in some of the expenses and stuff.
Nope. take that into account then. You guys are looking at those kind of
Yeah.
issues.
Yes, we are. So that is the presentation of the preliminary 2021 budget and kind of where we're at. Is there any other questions? Anything that you, so the next steps here is we'd like from the commissioners, if you could review it, give us any comments back in the next week or so. So that way Kevin and I have time to review them and get stuff put together for the meeting on the 25th.
I do think if I could say this, there's still a lot of things that could be trimmed in this budget. Can't hear you, Dan. I'll go back. There are some things that can be trimmed on this budget. There's some of the wish list that I think we look outside the box a little bit and we can come up with a few things that staff would recommend. And then between that and what the commissioners, this is kind of guides us. So, you know, you fund the projects that are important to the PUD as a whole, and some of the other projects that may not be as crucial, we can hold off on. So I do think there's some work to do here, and I do think though we can get this into a decent shape. I think we have some very good things that can be done to work through the budget and make it very user friendly in 2021.
So I lost some of that last 60 seconds there. I was talking too and saw that I was muted. So where are we at, Kevin? Are we down to number 4 then on discussion?
Yeah, we've presented the budget preliminary as it is today. We would like input from the commissioners to, and not necessarily even today. A lot of this we wanted to visit with you on, give you our views, and then as you digest things, let us know, and we'll start incorporating things for the budget.
This is Jeff. I think it'd be good to have, like we said, just maybe a little bit more on the equipment side, the vehicle replacement side, just so that we don't cut things down to the bone again and make no progress. Just a little more information about the age of the fleet and how the replacements or the logic behind the replacements. And then maybe just a little footnote on the broadband, because it's going to be the first year that broadband is called out like this in the budget. Just maybe for somebody who picks this up the first time and hasn't been a part of these meetings, even if we had a footnote that says up until 2021, broadband has been part of the electrical side. This is an attempt to pull it out and as its own business model. The funding at this point is mostly coming from property taxes. However, we anticipate revenues growing over time. And I don't know if that makes sense to show it in a budget document, because really the budget's numbers, but I think context is important to understanding numbers. So those are my 2 thoughts. And overall, I just want to say how I think this is just an outstanding overview. You guys have clearly done your homework. You're providing, again, context for us so we can see multiple years. You're pulling out capital projects that are more discretionary, so you're giving us feedback on what we can manage to help the numbers. And you're really being super transparent as I think you can be on this. So I really appreciate it. Good work.
I want to add that I really appreciate the format that you've provided, that you've indexed the talking points against the numbers. And that's really excuse me, that's really helpful in reviewing ahead of time. So we can be familiar with what you're going to discuss. So very nice presentation. And I look forward to our next meeting where we refine this a bit more. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job to staff. So Will, I'm not seeing any of the public listed here. Is there anybody phoned in that I'm not seeing or? All right, so there's no need to ask for public comment then. Anybody else? Dawn, Joel, any thoughts? If you're still on here, let me see. See Dawn's still on here and Joel. Any thoughts?
None from Joel.
Okay. And Dawn must have departed, huh? I'm not seeing or hearing him. All right. Any further discussion then? Any final thoughts? At least you guys are hearing me. I've had bouts here where I wasn't sure if I was being heard or I was able to hear anybody. So, all right. Well, we'll hopefully get that figured out down the road with my technological issues here. So, I'll accept a motion to adjourn then if there's nothing else for the good of the order.
So moved. I'll second.
All right. Second in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone. Nice job,
Thanks,
Mike and
everyone.
Kevin.
Appreciate